I'm Kate Murray. I'm the President and CEO of Canada's Stem Cell Network. First, before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm based in Ottawa on the traditional lands of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. The Stem Cell Network is a national not-for-profit, and we specialize in stem cell research for regenerative medicine. I've been with the network since 2016. Prior to that, I've been in various research-based organizations, from the Council of Canadian Academies to the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. But my career began many years ago working politically, both for the Minister of the Environment and for a variety of other ministers, including the Minister for Status of Women and Transport. So I am really pleased to be able to join such a fantastic panel today. And I'd like to introduce our panel members, and then we'll have each panel member provide a few opening remarks on some of their observations about the 2022 federal budget. So our first panel member is Mark Agnew. Mark's a Senior VP of Policy and Government Relations at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. In this role, he manages the Chamber's policy department and advocacy agenda domestically and internationally. And I'm looking forward to some of his political insights on this budget today. He can say things that some of us can't, so that'll be great. Karen Hamburg was appointed to the Government of Canada's Industry Strategy Council, representing the clean technology sector, and was named the chair of the Clean Energy Technology Strategy Table in 2020. She's currently the chair emeritus of the board of directors for CalSTART, which I have learned is the US's largest nonprofit member-driven coalition that accelerates the growth of the clean transportation industry. Karima Elsabar is wonderful to have her on our panel today. She is a founding CEO and general partner at Cork Venture, a global venture and capital firm. She's the director of the Global Health Sciences Fund. Prior to joining Cork, she was the CEO and president of the Center for Drug Research and Development organization, now known as ADMARE. She was also CEO and president of Life Sciences BC. I could go on about all of our panel members this morning, but before we move on from this, I don't want to forget introducing Norma. Norma Cozet is the Vice President of Research and Chief Economist at Quebec Employers Council, or CPQ. And prior to this role, she was the Director of Research and the Chief Economist at CPQ, an economist at the Montreal Economic Institute, and a lecturer in the Department of Economics at the University de Montreal. So thank you everyone for joining today. I know we're going to have a great discussion. And so I think the first thing to do is to start with some opening remarks from each of you about your perspectives on Budget 2022. Mark, as you're the only guy on the panel, let's start with you.
Thank you very much for that. And let me just say thank you to the organizers for the invitation to participate. It's great to be here. I know this isn't perhaps the typical milieu where you would see the Canadian participate, but it's always great to meet new stakeholders, and certainly even in the conversation that the panels had before, and even learning a little bit about what's going on in other bits of the innovation space beyond what we deal with. So as a multi-sector association, and as we like to say, I think truthfully, that we're the largest business association in Canada, we look at the budget from a fairly macro perspective because it impacts pretty much every member in the Canadian Chamber in some shape or form. And so at a very high level, it's a mixed bag, budget. Certainly the money was spread very thin. Everyone I think saw something in there that they could relate to and, be happy about to a certain degree in one way or another. I think what really stands out at an overarching level from an innovation standpoint is the sheer number of new initiatives that are kind of getting off the ground. So whether it's the Canada Growth Fund, the Innovation Agency, the expanded mandate of the NCIB, the CCUS tax credit, additional funding for, I don't think we're calling them super clusters anymore. I think they're now just innovation clusters. The net zero accelerator that we had beforehand. So there's a lot of different things that are on the table. I'm going to go through 7 really quick items that stood out to us, and I promise I won't belabor them so that we can give the other panelists a bit of oxygen in the discussion. But so the first one is the Canada Innovation and Investment Agency. And this is a really interesting model to see, how they're going to unfold. There was a lot of commentary beforehand from, numerous thought leaders about having a DARPA style initiative up here that would be thinking about some of these really, interesting longer term innovative projects, the government with a different approach. And so we'll see how that, goes and how it's created. There was a paragraph in there also that blended together the SHRED review and the patent box. Happy to see the patent box in there. Some of the chamber's been on the record supporting, and SHRED, we can talk about this a bit more, but I think a lot of our members, it's fair to say, see SHRED as becoming a compliance program rather than an innovation one. And so having the government take a look at that is something that we're quite happy to see. And there's actually a Federal Court of Appeal case that the chamber has made an intervention in. And so certainly we're happy to see that this is now put on the table. Those are some of the direct impacts for innovation that we saw. And then there were a number of what I would call indirect things that we'll see how they impact the innovation space from kind of a downstream sort of pull perspective. So, for instance, investments in critical minerals, we're going to need to have new technologies to get out these products in cost-effective ways. Investments in cybersecurity, where great to see investments made in the security community, but not a whole lot for business support. So we'll see how that unfolds itself. And then another bit of innovation that I think will be quite interesting to watch, and how it sort of indirectly impacts the S&T sectors around the cannabis industry. Again, cannabis has been treated by the government largely as a regulatory problem that sits in Health Canada. And so seeing the industry department now take this on, we're hoping we'll have a bit more of an innovation approach to it. And what are some of the innovative products that can be brought to market there? The last thing I'll say is around the defense space. As an organization, we've been asking the government to move forward on NORAD modernization, not just for the sake of the important national security reasons, but also for the economic and industrial supply chain benefits that can accrue to Canadian companies. And what we're hoping to see is that the budget has kind of laid some of the initial table stakes, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And we think that should be done in a fairly logical and sequential way. And so we need to figure out what is the security threat that we need to address, what are the capabilities that we have today, and then how do we address those gaps, and what innovation and R&D needs to occur. And so the government has talked about NORAD. We're glad to see them talking about it more, but we don't yet have the money on the table. We don't yet have the parameters there. And so that's something that, as it relates to innovation in the defense industry, we're hoping that we can see more good news coming down the pipe. But that being said, we don't have a great track record with large procurement platforms in the defense space, whether it's been the frigate program, which has had certainly its fair share of issues, or the fighter jet program. So certainly watching that one as well. But I'll stop there, Kate, and hopefully we can get into some of those things in the Q&A a bit more.
That's terrific. Thanks. Norma, why don't we move to you? What's your opinion on the budget?
Well, as a multi-sector also representative of Quebec businesses and associations, of course, lots of points raised by Mark are also shared from our point of view. What we found probably mainly interesting is the focus on growth and the green transition, what we call the green transition. So the government had money to prioritize innovation and this green transition. So the focus and recognizing the challenges Canada is facing and trying to address these challenges from productivity, R&D investment, innovation, all challenges that we know from decades. And so now we're seeing that the government is really putting the focus on these challenges and trying to find solutions. Of course, we also appreciated like the new Innovation and Investment Agency, Canada Growth Fund. Of course, the challenge will be in the implementation and coordination of these new tools, let's say, or these new it's a part of tools we have to address our challenges. Also, the measures to spur the development of a domestic zero emissions vehicle chain is something very interesting and very important critical strategy for critical minerals as well. Of course, while we were leading the budget, I mean, lots of details are to come in the fall update. So it's hard to assess what would be the impact. But I think it's the right direction, definitely, putting the focus on important things for Canada prosperity for the future. Because like in the latest OECD forecast, Canada has the lowest, among the lowest growth for the coming decade. So it's important to reverse this tendency and to focus on growth for our prosperity and the prosperity of Canadians, always with a perspective also of climate change and mitigation of climate change, also adaptation. But so how can we, as David and Omer also mentioned, like clean growth? I think this is basically what's we liked in this budget. Maybe a couple of things maybe that Mark and didn't also because we can't have like technological change or green transition without the talent, without the human capital. And there were also some interesting measures regarding talent, like the willingness and the investments to accelerate, to have more, for the entry of workers, of immigrants, workers and students as well. So these are also some factors which we found very important. And in Quebec and in other places in Canada, we have like shortage of workers and of talents, and not talent, but I mean, we need workers, all qualifications, highly qualified individuals and less qualified individuals. So trying to have more efficient program and being able to receive workers and students in a more efficient and rapid way is also something important. So the review of SHRED, of course, so far it's been the cornerstone of innovation policy in Canada. I mean, having tax credits is part of also a tool. So we have like to work both on the push and pull, as we say in innovation. So it's important to see what this review. It's true that it has been very complicated, so there is definitely room to modernize it and simplify it in order so that this program can contribute more, to be more efficient and contribute more to R&D in Canada, and also bringing innovation to the market, which is also as one mentioned, Achilles' heel. So this is something also which we have been talking about for several years. And so it will be important to see how it will all be implemented and what the results will be. So I stop here maybe.
Thanks, Norma. There was a lot there. That was very helpful. Karen, what's your take?
Sure, great. Thank you, Kate. So I would like to build on a few of the comments that David and Omar spoke about this morning. And first of all, this tension between economic growth and emissions reduction. And they're exactly right. The challenge of our time now, challenge for Canada, for every economy then, is to build and grow an economy that also reduces emissions. So when we look at that tension though and drill down, the challenge and the opportunity takes a bit better shape, right? And so in terms of revenue for Canada, as GDP from our oil and gas sector is expected to decline, do we expect to see the same type of growth from our clean technology sector? So there's a challenge there. And I would encourage anyone that wants a sobering read to read the Bank of Canada's climate scenarios that came out at the end of January, because it really is a concern here about GDP in our economy. Infrastructure as well. So as we have this expected decline in the use of fossil fuels and the buildup of renewable energy, that's a big infrastructure consideration. Norma mentioned the challenge of people and talent and human capital, right? And how do we transition meaningful, impactful roles from those sectors that are going to be displaced? And so this is really, challenge and opportunity for Canada. And if you think back to what, Larry Fink in his 2022 letter to CEOs, the CEO of BlackRock, he said, the next 1,000 unicorns are going to be those scalable, sustainable innovators, the startups that will help the world decarbonize and make the energy transition affordable for all consumers. It's not going to be the next, social media company. It's going to be these real clean technology, clean energy leaders. So the question then is, does Canada have that nucleus right now? And what does Canada need to do to be able to scale not just technologies and not just companies, but actual clean solutions that are going to decarbonize and get us to our net zero objectives? So maybe I'll just start a bit of a framing then of our sector. And it's interesting, we've talked about it as a sector. Other people talk about it sort of as an enabler of economic growth. But if we just sort of talk about it in terms of an industrial sector, it's about 800 clean tech firms in Canada, representing about 3% of GDP. It's a real diverse set of technologies and companies, everything from energy storage, clean transportation, waste management, covering the whole sort of gamut of clean solutions. The companies are at very varying maturity levels, for lack of a better term, right? I think there's about 3 companies in the sector that have more than $100 million in revenue, in annual revenue, right? So, I would encourage people, can you name 3 or 4 or 5 of Canada's clean technology leaders? It's perhaps not the largest, most high profile companies in Canada, but we certainly do have some companies that have some real opportunity to play in a global space here. So the other thing that David and Omar spoke about this morning too was the economic strategy tables. And so Karima and I have been on the table since 2017. There were 6 tables then. Minister Baines then added tourism about 2018 or so. When the Industry Strategy Council got together, they added transportation and retail. So that took us up to 9. And then Mark's point here about cannabis is interesting because I read in the Globe and Mail about a week ago that they've added an economic strategy table on cannabis. So that takes us up to 10. So it would be fascinating to see the government, what they're going to be doing next with those economic strategy tables, because there have been really significant recommendations advanced. There have been some recommendations implemented in sort of a quiet behind the scenes way, but there's still a lot more work to do. So when Karima and I were serving on the Industry Strategy Council, around this time, you would have remembered, summer of 2020, all of the buzz about Build Back Better and, the green recovery plans. And so really significant organizations in Canada were producing comprehensive plans around how we can, reduce emissions, create jobs, have economic growth, and what Canada needs to do in this next phase of its economy. And so they said it's this incredible, multi-trillion-dollar opportunity for global clean tech. We have 13 of 100 leading companies on this global clean tech index. We have a federal government with a net zero commitment. Therefore, we're great. We're well positioned. And the council said, okay, whoa, we're making a lot of assumptions in those, great sort of market drivers. What are the companies going to need? And so this is what I'm fascinated about with the budget then, is of course there is, incredible investment across a lot of traditional industrial sectors and new initiatives as well. But to what degree does the budget create markets, accelerate deployment, and really help our companies to succeed? And I'll stop with that.
Great, that was terrific. Karima, can you pick up from there? Oh, we can't hear you there. You're on mute.
Thank you. I'm glad Karen always does a little bit of work for me ahead of time, so I love having her ahead of time. But firstly, let me just say I recognize that I'm speaking from the traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Sabertooth peoples here in Vancouver. I want to thank actually Omar and Dave this morning for really unpacking the 2022 budget and its implications very nicely for us to all talk to. So thank you to them both if they're listening. So let me start with the positive, and then I'll wane into the tougher things. The positive for me, in my role as a life science leader in many areas for a very, very long time, 35 years to be precise, and now a venture capital investor in the biosciences. And I'll focus a little bit more on the life sciences and biosciences because I think other areas have been talked by my colleagues. And also as the chair of the Health Bioscience Economic Strategy Table, I must say that I was firstly very pleased that for the first time, innovation was front and center as one of the three key pillars. You know, for the longest time in Canada, we have paid lip service to the knowledge economy and the value of the innovation economy with modest investments in the innovation sector and never celebrating what innovation has brought out to us. Finally, I felt that this budget has actually shown some recognition that innovation impacts all sectors and is in fact key to enabling us to be competitive and improve our productivity if we are to do so in the future. So I was very pleased that it actually got the recognition that it should, by government in the way that it did. Having said that, my concern around economic productivity and Canada's lagging behind in the OECD, sort of right at the bottom, 38 or 39, I can't remember where we are, is really concerning because it's been like that for a while and we've been heading in that direction. So in spite of the investments that have been made and in spite of the huge last budget that we had and now, pretty decent budget we have this year, in spite of that, the big question I think we have to ask ourselves is this still to scale and scope and speed at which these investments have to be made? Is it sufficient? Is this going to enable us to even start closing that gap? Getting to an OECD average of 2.68% of GERD as a percentage of GDP, $23 billion. How and when are we going to even catch up to that median, let alone to be in the top 3, 4, 5 countries in the world, around productivity. So it's a big worry for me. And I feel that, particularly I worry about investment, obviously in the health sciences. I think they've done a good job moving towards clean tech, but we can't just be on a one-leg stool. We've got to be beyond clean tech. And I think that, and Karen will remember that in our work at the Economic Strategy Tables and at the Industry Strategy Council, we had said that at the very minimum, the three kind of legs to the stool were, the clean tech, digitizing the country end to end fully, and digitizing meant a lot of things, not just broadband, and, having health biosciences, all of this enveloped in strong public-private partnerships and collaboration with industry. So, I feel like, again, we've sort of picked one leg and we've kind of moved with that. And so I worry about that. And I think I don't need to remind anybody about the role that the bioscience sector has played in rescuing us in COVID. And do you think that we would have been able to do that rapidly and that quickly if we hadn't invested previously in science and tech? So we have done that, and we've done it, as we've shown through the academic community in the previous panel, that we really lead when it comes to universities and what's going on in there in the early stage R&D. But we need to invest in the entire ecosystem. And I worry we don't do that adequately, and we're still not thinking that way. And if we want to really maintain that quality of life for Canadians, we can't just be thinking about the social implications and all the investments we have to make on the social and health side. It's also on the economy. If we don't have the economy, we can't do any of those other things. So, I think wrapping our heads around that, I'm not sure everybody does that fully. I completely support Dave in what he has said, that we require a completely aligned industrial strategy with a trade strategy, with an innovation strategy. Without this, alignment, we're going to fall short. So I would say that ISET and government have actually taken some bold steps and put together the economic strategy tables. The Industry Strategy Council have got industry leaders to lead those discussions and consultations and drive this, with the bureaucrats in government, and to come up with some great strategy and recommendations. The problem has been, have we implemented those strategies and recommendations? And once again, we've talked about many reports in previous years where similar recommendations have come up. In fact, all of the economic strategy tables, I would say 50% of the recommendations crossed each other. They were completely similar. So that's, was pretty incredible to see that there's some big things that need to be resolved. And implementation needs to be on scale, as I said earlier. We tend to implement incrementally and selectively and sporadically, and that's the problem. So, I'll just, before I finish, just say, for example, on our table, and Karen can probably, have similar recommendations out of her table, 5 big areas with very specific actions under them were, accelerate innovation adoption, employ value-based procurement, in our healthcare system. Health is one of our biggest expense. Let's mobilize that and use it correctly. The second thing was design agile regulations. Regulations are not just there to be barriers and protect, they're also there to be enabling and move things forward. We talked about harnessing the digital technology by creating, for example, in health, the National Digital Health Strategy featuring interoperable digital health platform. We talked about, Norma's concern around talent. We said, don't not just develop and attract talent, but we need to retain our own talent. Do you know the leakage of talent from Canada going out from once they've graduated to other countries? It's phenomenal. We're basically an off-balance sheet pipeline for everybody else. And then the creation of anchor firms, by mobilizing late-stage capital and scaling up high-potential firms, broadening them and keeping them here. And a little bit of that has already started with companies like Accelera in our sector, Precision Nano and others, Medicago and so on, but not to this extent and scale that we need to do it. And I can't remember who in an earlier panel mentioned, bringing in the pension funds and getting them. These are our tax dollars, getting them to invest in Canadian science and technology. So I'll sort of leave it there, with saying that in conclusion, I think Canada needs to build on its strengths in a targeted strategic way with actions on scale and speed and along the entire innovation continuum if we are to maintain a high quality of life for all Canadians. I'll leave it there.
Wow. I don't know how to add on to all of this in a really substantive way, but before we delve into the questions, I think one of the questions about this budget is that it felt to me as if it was it's a first step of 4 budgets, that this is not a one book wonder. This is going to be a series of budgets over the next 4 years, and that this budget starts a process. We're seeing program reviews, we're seeing new consultations and initiatives started on things like the Innovation Council. I think that this is just the start, and for the government, and as they are coming sort of out of COVID, except I'm in the health research sector, so I don't like to say we're out of COVID because we're not. But I think that it's very important to see this not in isolation, but as part of a multi-year plan here. And I think this is the first chapter in that multi-year plan. Politically, I also looks to budgets, and there's a lot of pressure on politicians for it to be something for everyone. And so there was a sprinkling of just about everything, from defense to dental care to innovation to housing. There was the climate piece is obviously key. There was so much packed into this budget. And I tend to wonder if this political pressure that governments feel about trying to make something for everyone in one document ends up leaving people feeling unsatisfied with the end result, and that you're begging for more or different or a stronger focus. And so I'm curious about how you would attach a headline to this. We heard Dave say today that he saw this as a clean growth budget. We also heard about, and it was reinforced by Omar, about the 3 pillars of this budget that Minister Freeland put up. But what do you think really stands out from this budget? If you were to do the headline, you take Dave and Omar's content from this morning and you have to bring it down to the headline or the tweet, what is it? For me, it's more to come, because I think it's a first next step. But I'm curious as to how you folks see it, and if you think there's something that rises out more than other things. Who wants to start us off?
Well, maybe.
Okay. Go for it, Karen.
Sure. Sorry about that, Norma. So my takeaway, and Kate, building on your point about, some folks thinking investment wasn't enough in the clean tech space, in the sort of the environmental policy community, the think tanks and that, they saw this very much as the first budget that's going to link climate action with economic growth, and that it will operationalize the emissions reduction plan that was, released a few weeks earlier. But I think the takeaway is that even as we're talking about the significant investments that are going to be made, there was a line that's still 125 to 140 billion per year is still going to be needed for this climate transition, for this net zero transition that we are, this complete industrial transformation of our economy that's underway. So you're right, in terms of more to come, in terms of details, but also more to come in terms of really significant investment.
Norma?
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely it's a first step or first steps, more to come, and more details. And also, we should remember that the current economic context, I mean, the additional revenues which the government had due to inflation, due to economic growth, helped spur some spending at the right place for innovation, for green transition, for climate change and clean tech, etc. All the initiatives you mentioned. Of course, we have lots of challenges ahead of us. Karima mentioned the health sector with our aging population. We saw it also during the pandemic. And the housing also, I think it's a bit, of course, it's a social problem, but it's also an economic problem because in some regions, the lack of affordable housing is an impediment to have workers there, and so we addressing important issues, but lots of more to come definitely, and lots of challenges to come as well.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll go next. I mean, I had said to someone else in a different context that I kind of, to pick up on your point, Kate, a lot to come, but what my sort of tweetable moment was, I called it the down payment budget, in that there's a lot of initial investments here and there. Oh boy, I'm going to have a lot of consultations as the chamber, by the way, to respond to in the next 12 months on like various agencies being created. There's a little nugget that got buried in there, but it's going to be massive around reviewing competition policy in Canada. So some of these things only prelude more. I think what I would say though about what's to come, and this sort of speaks to the really macro level like deficit projections, is that every year the sort of like downward curve for going back to balanced budgets keeps shifting out to the right with each progressive budget. And so what I think is going to be interesting to see is as more of these spending commitments come online, whether it's pharmacare, NORAD modernization, a whole host of other measures, is that curve going to keep the downward trajectory, or is it going to keep shifting out to the right? Because we always seem to be sort of 4 to 5 years away from eliminating the deficit, and kind of stuck on this hamster wheel at the moment.
Yeah, true.
I would have really liked to have seen the long-term industrial strategy articulated, and then this be the start of obviously government can't do everything all at once. And obviously there isn't lots of money to do all the things that we would like. But to be able to articulate a vision for this country, to say 10 years from now, this is where we will be world leading. This is what we will have achieved in Canada. And this is the quality of life we'll have for our people. A bold strategy with a beginning, and then to say, more to come. Of course, it's going to be more to come every year. But I think that people are hungry for that and are looking for that vision, big, bold vision from government, not just sprinklings and not just, ad hoc, haphazard, year to year kind of, moving along.
Yeah. So I think if I hear you correctly, you didn't feel as if a real true vision resonated and came to the top. It was just trying to get everybody and everybody's pieces covered off through a little sprinkling here and there.
Yes, and I think that the ingredients for a vision are there. Government's already done a lot of work on this over the past 6 years, I would say. And those ingredients are there. It's putting together and taking that bold step. Doing big visions is a bold step, because not everybody's always going to be happy. But I think that we're at a point in our country that if we don't do this, we are really going to slip in the quality of our life and productivity in a way that we won't be able to turn around easily.
Karen.
Hey, thanks. I want to build on a few things Karima said about this industrial strategy. And so when the council was having this discussion, and as you can expect, when you start talking about industrial strategy or industrial policy, the reaction is from all corners, not just government, but all corners, is to what degree does the government have any success in picking winners and losers? And we said, agree, but we're not about picking and choosing, winners for companies or technologies, but certainly we can agree on the sectors of our economy, the direction that we want to go in, the competitive advantage that we have and that we want to grow, what sets Canada apart on the global stage. That can be part of our industrial strategy. We don't need to say it's going to be X billion to this activity, but it is, we want to be, and I'll use my clean tech example here, because the only goal that the government of Canada has stated publicly for sector is $20 billion in exports by 2025. Well, does that resonate to many Canadians other than me and a few others in my sector? They'll say, where are you now? Is this good? Do we have a chance of hitting it? We're at 9 billion right now. So we have 4 years to get to, this 20 billion. The ambition and the vision for Canada, I think Karima's exactly right. We're missing this opportunity to really articulate a vision for our growth and our prosperity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'll just add one more thing. Sorry to butt in. I've had my say, but think of the companies that we've built. Think of the innovation that's come out of this country, from going back 100 years, from insulin to pacemaker to the first coated stent to the antibodies that have accelerated everything. We wouldn't have had the vaccines without the work that Acuitas and Peter Cullis's lab has done, in Vancouver. All of the innovations I can tell you about. We can write books on it. And so, come on, acknowledge that and get our innovation economy going and build on it. Innovation touches every sector, by the way. Even in our resource sectors, we will not remain competitive if we're not innovative. But we have these big sectors in that where we are really leading, and people look to Canada as a pipeline for those technologies.
Yeah. And I'll just add to one of those innovations, which is the existence of stem cells was proven by 2 Canadians in the 1960s at U of T, and we're leaders in the field today. So there's my plug for stem cell research. I'm a good CEO. Just to build on that though, and one of the comments that was made in the last panel was a frustration about how these Canadian innovations are not being adopted in this country. And there was talk about what Accelera was able to do, but their technology, it's not available here for me, my mom, my dad, for any of us. You have to go to the United States. So what's happening? Why is this pipeline broken? Why is it not working the way it should? Why are we not adopting our own Canadian technologies?
Well, I'll have a first bash at that since it's in the health sector. And I'll say is that, you know, we had a lot of discussion about this at the HBEST table. And, you know, there was complete agreement that we need to move towards creating a value-based healthcare system. We even brought other countries that are doing this well, like the Dutch, over to see what they were doing, and you know, the Scandinavians and so forth. And we need to adopt some of these best practices, and we need to look at this change, moving towards a value-based healthcare system instead of a siloed system where we're only looking at, you know, end cost without looking at the true health economics of it and outcomes. So that, you know, this is one of the big things. And a part of that is also value-based procurement. So we are very averse to procuring anything new, because immediately it's a cost factor. We don't do the economics and the benefit of it, you know, in a systematic way, that maybe we might pay a little more for it today, but we'll probably save, you know, a hell of a lot, you know, 5 years down the road when that patient won't get hospitalized. So we will provide better patient outcomes, save money to the healthcare system, and promote our biosciences industry. So, you know, this needs a big bite, and somebody who has to have strong heart to take this on in government.
Yes, agreed. Mark, you had something to add there?
Yeah, so I think first off, in violent agreement on value-based procurement. I mean, that's something that, you know, you hear us talking about a lot. And what I would add as the sort of a bit of a commentary as to the barrier that I think we have to overcome as a country is that we try to do innovation on the cheap. You know, we sort of like the idea of like people in lab coats going around and, you know, making, you know, nice living wage, you know, paychecks, but we don't necessarily like the sort of cost implications of that. I mean, yes, you're going to have to pay a bit more, but you're going to get a better outcome. And this kind of is the whole point of the value-based procurement practices. The other thing I would say is that, you know, there's a risk that when we look at budgets and we look at what governments can do to help spur innovation, everyone immediately just thinks about a program, right? So we need to have just wheelbarrows of cash going out the door, and that's the only way to make things happen. And, you know, people, I think, you know, outside of, you know, our lines of work, that's what they think I do. I go around the corridors of Ottawa just asking for giant checks to be cut, but that's couldn't be further from the truth. And one of the things that we've been talking a lot about as the Canadian Chamber is that there are non-monetary ways for us to encourage growth in the economy. And so the regulatory approvals process is a perfect case in point, where the government can actually not spend money, improve the regulatory system, and have better outcomes and encourage economic growth.
Yeah, definitely. I think the regulatory approach, as Mark mentioned, it's non-financial, so it doesn't cost government money. And also, yeah, how to keep our innovation, how to bring our innovation to the market in Canada. This is a challenge. I don't have the answer, but it's known that our innovators tend more to sell their IP to outside, mainly the US, rather than pursuing the development in Canada. So maybe like giving more information, helping them, giving them counsel on the importance of keeping IP or other innovation in Canada. Well, the government is touched about the patent box. It might be interesting. In Quebec, we've experienced with this with mixed results, because it depends on the condition. How do you value also revenue from innovation, from IP? But I think it help, but definitely it's hard to implement a culture of innovation, but that's what we need anyway, because when we speak in the budget, they give the Finnish example and the Israel example. Definitely, I mean, it's a whole culture of innovation which is there, which takes time to implement, definitely, but which must be our aim. So, and I think that the focus, as I mentioned earlier, speaking about innovation, talking and putting the emphasis in the public and giving examples of, for instance, regarding vaccines or other So it's important. Be more open to innovation in the procurement is also, the budget speaks a bit about the green procurement. So yeah, definitely this is something which is positive, but also be more open to innovation more broadly, different ways of doing, even if it costs a bit more in the short run, but in the long run, it will cost definitely less, and it will bring positive downfalls to our prosperity, and building also expertise, building know-how, and starting, because I mean, startups or companies which start which can deal with the government have more opportunities to expand and to export also. So these are some issues.
And so we also have two questions from the audience, so I want to make sure we get those in. But Karen, did you have a comment just before I turn to those?
I would love to chime in on the idea of procurement and the challenges of that. And I actually have a keynote that I deliver often, and I'm happy to share the notes. And it's, you know, the 10 things that procurement professionals need to know about clean tech, and the 10 things that clean tech companies need to know about procurement professionals, right? And so in my sector, young companies, you know, different levels of maturity around business development, market development, you know, how these processes work. I like to say I have met no unhelpful people in Ottawa when it comes to procurement. I have met many people that work within the hard boundaries of a very risk-averse system, but there are people who are trying to move this forward and find ways and work within the systems that have been set up, right? And so when I hear this procurement advanced as a recommendation, and it's critical that we do, it's up there with a degree of difficulty with, you know, fixing interprovincial trade barriers or something else that comes up again and again and again, right? It's tough to do. And so what I found, though, in my thinking on this is that for innovation to be deployed, we need that technology readiness, we need the policy readiness, we need the market readiness as well. And unless we have those three elements of it, you know, the customer development is as important as what you're doing on product and technology, right? Having that customer, having the right policy frameworks in place, having the right kind of market drivers and conditions, and having a technology that will be competitive with its, you know, non-clean tech or its incumbent technology. It's tough. It's tough. There's green shoots of optimism in clean tech and with what the federal government's doing, but it is so difficult.
Yeah. Okay, so let me turn to our audience questions. They're both good. So one of the difficulties in creating innovation in Canada is the fact that the percent of R&D done in Canada by companies has been falling for a number of years. What measures in this budget do you think will turn this around, and what else should be done into the future? Anybody want to take a crack at that one?
Well, I guess I can start. So it is a hard thing. Is the one silver bullet. I'm not saying that to be, you know, flippant, because I feel like that's what I should say, but I think it, you know, genuinely is true. I think part of it is a business culture thing here, and as someone who previously has done a lot of work in international trade, I mean, it's the same problem we, you know, asked all the time. Well, why do we keep exporting 75% to the U.S.? It is a more conservative business culture here, you know, in Canada, and so that is the kind of thing that takes like decades, if not generations, to change. The second thing I would say is that the policy and environment, you know, we need to be sort of using every tool at our disposal, whether it's getting the right talent attraction through immigration or, you know, post-secondary education, you know, pipelines to ensure that we have the right people here to do the innovation, I think is one thing. And then the second thing is, how do we ensure that we're targeting this in the right way towards sectors? And so, you know, there's only so many Blackberries and Nortels that can ever, you know, come around. And so, you know, where do we have, you know, those comparative sector advantages where innovation is likely to occur? So if you ask me, I would actually agriculture, energy, natural resources. It's not just about sort of being hewers of water and wood, but there's a lot of innovation that needs to occur to do that more efficiently, to have, you know, better crop yields, et cetera. And you might not have the same sort of, you know, sexy thing that there's a phone that everyone around the world is carrying, but, you know, there's innovation that can and does occur here in the Canadian market. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Karima, I see your hand up there.
Yes, I would say, again, in the biosciences and the life sciences, Canada is recognized as having one of the most educated workforces in the world. We've looked at the figures that they presented earlier, the number of graduates and postgraduates we get, the quality of the science that comes out of here, the quality of our scientific publications. We're in the top three, we're top 3 or 4. We really do score very high. Of course, we wish we scored that high on the productivity end of things, which we don't. But the problem is that, we have real regulatory issues. And so one of the reasons that Big Pharma, for example, doesn't invest as heavily in R&D here. In fact, they pulled out some years ago in the work they were doing in Quebec. Norma, you'll be very familiar with that, companies that had pulled out. It is because of the regulatory environment. And we do have a duplicitous regulatory environment. We have the federal approvals, then you got to go individually to the province. It's a nightmare for people to, work through the regulatory environment. So, that has been brought up, that we do need to streamline, we do need to simplify. And then, recently there have been some big issues like PMBRB and, all of those kinds of reimbursement issues. The reality is that to be an innovative nation, it's not enough just to generate innovation. You have to be an adopter of innovation. And so we just haven't reached that. And our regulatory barriers are, amongst one of the big reasons.
Yeah. And I'd pick up on that. I see that with our investigators, the challenge of the regulatory environment and how to access that environment properly, how to prepare for it and work through it, and the burden of requirements that need to be met in order to work through it. In fact, at the academic level, there isn't necessarily the expertise to prepare all of the regulatory information that needs to go forward for doing more advanced clinical trials. This requires a team of experts who can pull these materials together. And so academic scientists, when you talk about where are the hurdles in translating research and taking academic research forward, that would be one of them. It's the resource intensive challenges associated with regulatory, how to engage with regulatory. We often also hear from our regulators that it is a flexible environment and they're responsive and they'll do their very best. But very often what you also come back with is questions or comments about, well, that's not really a regulatory issue. So therefore, I think one of the challenges for us in this country is regulatory literacy. So if you really want to see translation, you want things moving across that pipeline, we have to do a better job at regulatory literacy and making sure that those who are innovating can move forward without it becoming such a burden that they say, forget it. On that note,
sorry, Kate, if I could just jump in on the regulatory literacy point. I mean, one of the things that we think has been really lacking from the government's a regulatory literacy standpoint, the economic competitiveness impacts. If you talk to certain regulators in the federal government about the economic competitiveness, components, they can be dismissive at times. And it's not because of them being indifferent. It's because they're civil servants and they're following the rule book, and the rule book doesn't say that they have to have economic competitiveness considerations in there. And so one of the sort of regulatory literacy things that if I can use the terms that we've been pushing, is that federal regulators should have economic competitiveness mandates built into the work that they do. Not to get too far into the weeds of the audience, but the Privy Council Office, which is the central agency in Ottawa that supports the Prime Minister's office, there's cabinet directives that they have with the Treasury Board on regulatory rulemaking, and it needs to be firmly ingrained in there. Is our view.
Yeah, good point. Thank you for that. So I'd like to move on to the next question. So what is your take on the focus in the budget on research and innovation in higher education and the private sector settings, and the lack of targeted funding to other players that contribute to this in Canada? For example, hospitals and research institutes in the health sector. how do we ensure that these other players and their contributions are recognized and fostered to advance Canada's research and innovation agenda and success?
Wow. Well, one thing is clear, it's absolutely true. And, I can give an example of, countries like the UK, which truly turned around their game on innovation, and especially on the life sciences and the health innovation. As you know, it's one of the leading countries in the world. And that was some 20, 25 years ago when they actually finally came to the understanding and conclusion that there isn't them or us, and we can't be doing things on our own. So government can't create policies in isolation. The healthcare sector and the hospital sector cannot be operating on their own, and industry are the bad guys out there who are making money. We all had to work together. And I think when they finally all embraced that, and they truly have a remarkable relationship, the industry in the UK, with government and with the National Health Service. It really is an incredible relationship. Incredible things began to happen. And, some of the huge initiatives they've had, that are big multi-billion-dollar projects have all come out as a result of that, with the output and the engine of biotech companies spinning out, growing and anchoring there. UK is one of the biggest countries attracting talent from Canada and elsewhere to go work there. So I think it's that whole idea of public-private partnerships, public-public partnerships in general, true collaborations. If they could be, they are the underpinning of this. And I think, Karen, you'll recall that in our Industry Strategy Council work, that was one of the key framework items that had come out, that needed to change, and it needed to be a really, truly collaborative relationship. And then this starts to all happen, and part of that is the hospital healthcare system, which, as I said earlier, 50% of our budget is healthcare. We are in control of of that. This country, it's the biggest purchaser. We are not mobilizing this and utilizing this well, or the very smart people that work in this sector.
Yeah. And I think collaboration really is the point, and to really, we really need to work at embracing that concept within the research sector. It's done in parts but not as fully as it could be, I think. And in fact, the hospitals and the research institutes, I see it on a daily basis, the tremendous effort that they put into research and into clinical trials. The clinicians who are so engaged and committed to bringing innovative therapies to patients. It's really tremendous how that works. And it is a synergy between the universities and the research hospitals and the institutes. That's very important. And I think that this speaks to an issue around science communication, in fact, and how we communicate and how we do that collectively. And I think it's a topic for another day, but I think, a lot of the disinformation that we're seeing in this world and that we've experienced through COVID comes down to science communication, and we all need to do some navel gazing on that. And if we could do that more collectively, that would be really, I think, important. But I've gone off on a tangent from that question. So let me move to the last question. We have just a couple of minutes left, and this comes back to the environment. How important is carbon pricing for driving growth and innovation in the clean tech sector in Canada? Do we need more pricing mechanisms in general to help create market incentives for innovation and green transition?
Yes, short answer, yes, but it's also the certainty of those mechanisms. So all of my examples, or so many of my examples, come from my professional background of heavy duty transportation and the degree to which a fleet like UPS, Walmart, Amazon, what have you, would make a decision to transition from a diesel vehicle to renewable natural gas or a battery electric vehicle, or even make an investment in in a hydrogen fuel cell. So when they were doing these business cases, right, the certainty of that carbon pricing is factored in. If we look at what happened in California, it was not just cap and trade, but it was a low carbon fuel standard as well that Canada's trying to emulate with their Clean Fuels Plan. And it was also a commitment on behalf of their Air Resources Board to put billions of dollars into purchase and deployment incentives for the vehicles and for the utilities to build out the infrastructure. So the short answer, yes, many different types of mechanisms, and the certainty that is going to drive those big fleets in this one specific example to make those types of investments. Absolutely critical.
So on that, I think we're just coming up to the end of our time, and I know that I've been asked to make sure that our audience responds to the feedback poll that's going to be provided at the end. As well, I just wanted to note that the CSPC's panel proposal submission deadline has been extended by 2 weeks to May the 6th. I hope that many of you in the audience will be getting in some great submissions there. So we'll have another phenomenal science policy conference later this year. This has been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed our conversation today and connecting with all of you. Thanks so much for your time and your perspectives and insights. Made for a really enjoyable and fast hour.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye, all.
Bye for now. Thank you.